The decisions we make are a result of the violence, poverty, and fear in the society and culture in which we live. 1984 by George Orwell tells the story of a regular man in an irregular society. The main character is living in a totalitarian state of rule that controls every thought and action of its citizens. In Section 1, Chapter 1 of 1984, you see the absolute control the party has through the telescreens that appear everywhere. The telescreens are depicted as seeing all and knowing all because they monitor your every thought. The main character, Winston Smith, lives in fear every day that one wrong thought or action will get him sent to jail, or worse. On page 18, Winston writes down in his journal, "Down with Big Brother." The unsatisfactory environment in which he lives causes him to hate the party for being so controlling, and thus shapes his decisions to target his anger at the leader of the party, Big Brother. This hatred becomes rebellion as he continues breaking laws throughout the book. Ballad of the Landlord by Langston Hughes depicts the mistreatment of African Americans in the 1940s. Hughes tells the story of a black man that complains about problems in his house to the landlord. The landlord refuses to fix the problems, and thus the black man refuses to pay the rent. Once he refuses to pay the rent, the landlord shouts, "Police, police, come get this man. He's trying to ruin the government and overturn the land." Of course, the black man wasn't trying to do either of those things, but he was thrown in jail for 90 days. As you can see, the 1940s was a time of racial tension. Blacks were looked down upon in society and treated unfairly. The police officers and the landlord were shaped by the society they lived in. Society at the time said blacks should be treated less than whites. The police and the landlord listened, and their decision to put this man in jail were shaped because of this. A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bea is a memoir about the life of a boy soldier during the Sierra Leone Civil War. Ishmael was a normal boy living in Sierra Leone when the Civil War reached his town. He had no choice but to run into the force, leaving his family behind. He quickly had to adapt to the new war environment he now lived in. Ishmael writes, "Things changed rapidly, in a matter of seconds, and no one had any control over anything. We had yet to learn these things and implement survival tactics, which was what it came down to." The rebels' violence had forced Ishmael and his friends to resort to survival tactics after Sierra Leone was plunged into a civil war. Society had broken down to violence, and mere survival was prioritized before anything. The violent environment around Ishmael and the fear he faced shaped the decisions he made. He was forced into becoming a boy soldier, eventually taking drugs and killing people. Here's a short video clip about a boy similar to Ishmael.
The boy wants to start a new life and needs an education. Sharif was a boy soldier. Earlier this year, he commanded a group of boys on an extraordinary mission to kill innocent civilians and cut off their hands and feet.
It's narrow phenomenon.
The kids in Sierra Leone had to make a life or death decision. If they joined the army, they'd be allowed to live, but if they didn't, they'd most certainly be killed. The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell mentions a theory called the broken window theory. On page 141, Gladwell states, "If a window is broken and let unrepaired, people walking by will conclude that no one cares and no one is in charge." Malcolm Gladwell then states a case study about the crime rates in New York City. Because the environment in New York City at the time, people decided it was okay to commit crimes, and the crime rates were very high. In the city, relatively minor problems like graffiti, public disorder, aggressive panhandling are all the equivalent of broken windows. They're invitations to more serious crimes. In New York City at the time, there was graffiti everywhere, especially on the subway cars. The city officials decided they needed to remove all graffiti, and maybe the crime would stop. They set cleaning stations, and after a while, they made it impossible for graffiti to spread on the subway cars. Surprisingly, crime in the city started going down. The officials noted that Minor, seemingly insignificant quality of life crimes were tipping points for violent crimes. Once people started noticing more and more punishments for crimes, they stopped committing them, and the crime rates in the city fell quickly. The new orderly environment in New York City made people decide that committing crimes was bad, and the various environments in New York City affected the criminal decisions people made. The Lord of the Flies movie is another perfect example of how society and culture affects decisions. In this movie, you see children stranded on a deserted island. They are organized and functioning as a little society at first with hunters and leaders, but then people start getting violent. The kids fight over food and eventually resort to killing one another because of the environment they are in. The lack of food and the struggle for order and power causes the kids to fight.